Hello and welcome back to my YouTube channel. If you have never seen me before, I am very, very happy that you stumbled across this video, and I would love it if you subscribed because I'm going to be here for you every single week. I'm going to get straight into this one today because I'm not going to lie, I'm really excited to talk about it and to see what people think about it. So obviously Ashton Kutcher has been in the news quite a lot recently due to his rumoured friendship with P. Diddy, and I find it really interesting that he was involved in a murder case right near the beginning of his career. So I kind of just want to talk about the case that he was involved in. So let's get started. On the night of the 13th of August in 1993, a very, very shocking crime took place in the usually really, really quiet area of Glenview in Illinois. This place only had a population of around 50,000. So as you can imagine, this crime sent the entire place into a bit of a panic. Tricia Pacascio was born in 1975. She was 18 years old and had recently graduated from Glenbrook South High School. Tricia was described as being wholesome, popular, and genuinely nice to everybody. She made an effort to speak to everyone rather than sticking to one particular friend group. She was liked by everyone and loved so much by the entire Pacascio family. Tricia was due to start studying engineering and environmental issues at Purdue University, but on the evening of the 13th of August, all of that would change and she would sadly never get the chance to go. She'd been out that night with friends. They'd been on a scavenger hunt, which I think sounds so much fun and I would actually love to do something like that. But she dropped one of her friends off at home and she made it back to her own house at about 1 a.m. She gets out of her car and she walks up her driveway, and she is literally about to walk through her door when somebody jumps out of the bushes behind her and ambushes her. Tricia's dad wakes up the next morning and he gets a coffee in the kitchen as he usually would. It's a completely normal day until he walks past one of the back doors and sees a pair of tennis shoes kind of laid in a bit of an awkward position as though they are on somebody outside the door on the floor, and he instantly gets a gut feeling of something is not right, and he drops his coffee and runs to the door. He understandably starts screaming, which wakes up his wife, Tricia's mum, and also her brother. They all run downstairs. The police are called immediately and they arrive at the scene to find the body of 18-year-old Tricia stabbed to death on her front porch. Because Tricia was so loved by everybody, everyone in her family loved her, all of her friends loved her, people at school loved her. It was such a small town as well that everybody had just no idea why anybody would target Tricia or why she would be the victim of such a horrific crime. It just made no sense to anybody. The Cook County Sheriff's Department investigated this case, and initially they had about 15 suspects, but every single one of them got ruled out eventually, and there was just no kind of leads on the case at all. Nobody really had any insight into who it could be or what could have happened. So it was a really difficult case for police to investigate. There was just nothing to go off. Over the following years, her case didn't get closed, but it just kind of got passed around to different people. So other people would retire and then the case would move to another detective. It would kind of just get passed around a little bit. And sometimes that's good when fresh eyes get to see a case and they see something that other people maybe didn't see. But in this case, it just kind of floundered around a little bit and didn't really go anywhere. But during the following years, one name did kind of keep coming up a little bit, and it was a man called Michael Gargiulo, and he was interviewed because he actually lived locally. Michael himself was only 17 years old at the time. He lived about a block away from Tricia and her family, and he was actually friends with Tricia's younger brother Doug, but there wasn't really anything to properly link him to it. He denied having any involvement in it. Evidence-wise, because this happened in 1993, there wasn't really that much. The only thing that they really managed to get was some DNA that was underneath Tricia's fingernails. But because the technology wasn't really that great at the time, that DNA ended up being stored and kept on file in case developments were made in the future and they were able to find out whose DNA it was. Keep Tricia's case in mind, but we are now going to zoom forward to 8 years later, and it's 2001, and 22-year-old student Ashley Ellerin is living in Los Angeles and just having an absolute whale of a time. She is living her best party lifestyle. Imagine the hills. That's the kind of vibe that I get. She also actually studied at the Fashion Institute of Design and Merchandising, which is also featured on the hills because that is where Lauren Conrad also studied or studied. I don't know how realistic that was. But Ashley was a student there, and she was really serious about fashion and fashion design, and that is what she wanted to do when she eventually would graduate from school. But while she wasn't studying, she was out enjoying the nightlife of Los Angeles. She would mingle with little celebrities at parties and at nightclubs and events, and she was just honestly living her best life. One celebrity that she actually caught the attention of was 23-year-old Ashton Kutcher, who was just at the start of his acting career. They'd been out a few times before, and he'd asked her to go out again on another date on the 21st of February 2001. By this time in his career, Ashton had been working on That 70s Show for a few years, which is honestly one of my favourite TV shows. I love it so much. And Dude, Where's My Car had come out the year before, so he was getting quite big. He was getting more and more well known and taking on bigger and bigger roles. The night that their date was scheduled was actually the night of the Grammys, and they had arranged that they were going to go to a Grammys party. So Ashton was going to go to Ashley's house and pick her up at about 8 p.m, but then last minute he got invited to one of his friends' houses, and he was going to be going there at 7:30. So he did actually call up Ashley and let her know that he would still come and pick her up, but it was going to just be later than the 8 p.m. that they'd planned. A little bit after that, he actually called her up again, and he was just going to give her an update of what time he was thinking he was going to get there, but she didn't answer, so he left her a voicemail. She obviously must have picked this voicemail up and heard what he said, so she actually called him back at 8:24 p.m, and she told him that she was just getting out of the shower, she was going to dry her hair and put some makeup on, and then she was going to be ready for the date. Ashton arrives at Ashley's bungalow at about 10:45 p.m. He gives her a ring when he's in the car on the way there, actually, but she doesn't answer, so he just continues on. He arrives, he gets out of the car, and he goes up, knocks on the door, but there's no answer. So he's kind of stood at the doorway, kind of like looking, thinking about what he's going to do. He tries the door, it's locked. He, at this point, is thinking she's just pissed off because he's obviously got there a lot later than he anticipated, and maybe she was just a bit annoyed at him, so she was on purpose either had already gone out and gone with some friends somewhere, or she was just inside and she was just thinking, I'm going to make you wait. He does look through a window just before he leaves, and he notices a little bit of red wine that's spilled on the floor, and he kind of just thinks, oh, they've obviously just knocked a little bit of wine over, no big deal. And he ends up leaving and continuing on with his night. But it would be the next day at 9 a.m. when something really tragic would be found. At 9 a.m, Ashley's roommate, Justin Peterson, would discover Ashley's body just on the floor outside her bathroom door with 47 stab wounds, with 12 of those to be considered as fatal. As well as those, she also really tragically had a lot of defensive wounds to her arms and her hands, so obviously she had tried with all of her might to fight off her attacker. I always find it so tragic when people have defensive wounds. Like, you can just imagine the fight and the fear that someone would have in that moment, and the fact that they have put up such a fight that they've got wounds on them. I don't know. I just really don't like that. The detectives that had arrived at the scene first recalled how vividly the image of the crime scene remained in their brains because of how brutal and bloody and gory it was. It's something that they would never, ever, ever forget. Obviously now the police begin their investigations, and they want to speak to Justin Peterson, the roommate, because he's the one that found the body, her family, her friends, and of course Ashton Kutcher, because he was supposed to have been with her the night before. And Ashton is reported to have said that he was actually really nervous because his fingerprints will have been on the door handle. So if they just tested for things like that, it would have looked as though he was there and had maybe even gone in to commit the crime. But he told the police the whole story. He explained he was supposed to be going there at this time, ended up going to a friend's house, tried to rearrange, was going to come and pick her up, but then there was no answer. He tried the door, couldn't get in, so he left, and he didn't manage to speak to Ashley again for the rest of the night. The last time he spoke to Ashley was 8:24 p.m. when she called him and told him that she was just coming out of the shower. The police basically told him not to worry and said he wasn't actually a suspect at this time, and they were working on other theories and other leads. A neighbour actually told police that he was walking his dog past Ashley's house to a local dog park when he heard 2 screams. This neighbour had walked past at about 8:30 p.m, which is 6 minutes after Ashley had made that phone call to Ashton. So if these 2 screams were in fact the moment that Ashley got attacked, it would have literally been minutes or seconds after hanging up the phone to Ashton. When Ashley's friends are interviewed, a lot of them seem to mention the same name. It keeps coming up in conversation, so the police think it's probably worth taking a look at. The name that they keep bringing up is Mike, and this is a guy that would hang around quite often. He kind of lived in the local area, and he just gave the friends a little bit of a bad feeling. So a little bit of backstory. Mike, aka Michael Gargiulo, was 24 years old at this time, and he was an air conditioning repairman. He lived nearby, and he'd actually bumped into Ashley and Justin, her roommate, when they had a flat tire once. Michael fixed it for them and then gave them his business card. After this, they would kind of see each other regularly in the neighborhood, and they kind of became acquaintances, him and Ashley. Even though her friend group didn't really like him, they thought he was a little bit weird, a little bit sus. You know, when you just get a bit of a bad feeling about somebody and you're not quite sure why, but you're just a little bit like, not sure I'm keen on you. He gave them all that vibe. But Ashley was extremely friendly and social, so she didn't really think too much of it. She actually invited Michael to a party that they had once, and one of her friends just remembers that she kept kind of looking over at him, and every time she did, his eyes were focused, like laser focused on Ashley, and this friend just didn't like it. It was also claimed that he used to park his car outside Ashley and Justin's house at weird times and in the middle of the night. And once Justin actually went out and kind of said to him, "Are you okay? What's going on? Why are you outside our house? What are you doing?" And he said that he was just laying low. He also told Justin that he was a suspect in a murder that happened in Chicago, and the police and the FBI were after him. So understandably, Justin is freaked out and is like, "No, this is not going to be happening outside my house. Thank you very much." They'd actually heard a few weird stories about Michael and just didn't really fully know his background, and it just made them a little bit uncomfortable. So the fact that he offered up this information was just a little bit too much. And also the fact that he actually lifted up his trouser leg to show Justin that he had a hunting knife strapped to his ankle. So Justin at this point is just like, no. When all of that happened, Justin went and told Ashley about it, but Ashley was just like, "No, he's probably joking. He's probably just messing about. It won't have been serious." But that feeling never left Justin, and he always had a weird, uncomfortable feeling about him. The police had only been given the name Mike, though. They didn't know his full name at this point because Ashley's friend group had only ever known him as Mike. But one of her friends recalled how he'd once told them a story about getting hit by a cement truck that was working on the Kodak Theatre at Hollywood and Highland. He said this accident was going to make him rich because he'd filed a lawsuit. The detective contacted the construction company that owned the cement truck and also the Kodak Theatre, but there was no record of a lawsuit being filed. As a next step, the police started to broaden their search a little bit, and they literally searched for any kind of traffic accident that happened around the Kodak Theatre, just so that they could try and see if there was anything that linked a man named Mike. And they did actually find something useful. They found a report made by an individual whose dog had been hit by a car. Not exactly a man being hit by a cement truck, but a dog being hit by a car was still something being hit by something, and it helped them kind of piece things together. So the police looked at the name of the person who was driving the car that hit the dog, and the name of the man driving was Michael Gargiulo. Mike. His driving license was connected to the report that was made, so they showed the picture of the license to Ashley's friends and they confirmed that that was him. So the police now know the weird friend is called Michael Gargiulo, and that is who he is. But that is kind of all it showed, because at this point Michael Gargiulo has no link to the murder. He's just a weird friend. So bearing in mind this is now 2001 and significant enhancements have been made in blood testing and DNA testing. So while all of this is going on and the police are looking into this man and the murder of Ashley Ellerin, new detectives had actually just been put on the Trisha Picascio case, and because there was DNA logged on the system, they wanted to get it tested just to see if any of the enhancements would help find them a new person. Then one day, completely out of the blue, the detectives get a call from Cook County and the people who were actually just put in charge of looking at the Trisha Picascio case. They were actually in LA at the time and they were looking for Michael Gargiulo. at this exact moment. They were actually hoping that the LAPD might be able to give them his current location because they were needing to swab him. Because they had that DNA stored on the system that was found under Trisha's fingernails, they were retesting it because there was new detectives on the case. It's fresh eyes, it's people wanting to recheck stuff, go back over stuff that they'd looked at before. So they wanted to retest this DNA. So they were needing to look at suspects and people that they'd interviewed and gone through at the time to kind of see if anybody matched up now that the technology has got a little bit better. So that is why they are looking for Michael. Honestly, the LAPD and Cook County were both gobsmacked that they were both looking into separate cases that happened miles and miles and miles apart, 8 years apart, but they're both getting the same name of the same man. They could not believe what was happening. In December 2002, a sample from Michael was finally obtained and was sent for testing. During this kind of time, late in 2002, he was actually in a new relationship. What does that mean, Michael? What do you mean by you've got an extensive knowledge in forensics? Is it that you know that you've done it before and you think you can get away with it? Interesting. Anyway, a long 10 months after the blood had been sent off in September 2003, the blood comes back as a match, and the DNA that was underneath Trisha's fingernails that was found in 1993 is a match to Michael Gargiulo. Then, for some reason I will never ever understand, the police decide that there is not enough evidence to file charges against Michael. Why on earth would his DNA ever be underneath Trisha's fingernails if he wasn't involved in the crime and she literally had defensive wounds? It just makes no sense to me. I just don't understand. I get that they've got to have so much evidence linking something before you can actually do something, but that just seems beyond a joke. At this point, Michael has got nothing to worry about. He's just out enjoying his life when he enters into another new relationship with a woman called Gwen. This relationship moves quite quickly, and by September 2005, they've moved in together. This relationship also doesn't last too long. Gwen actually falls pregnant, but Michael is physically abusive to her during this pregnancy, and so she quickly ends the relationship. Michael is still living in the apartment that he and Gwen shared when another woman moves into the same building. She gets an apartment in a lower floor. This woman was called Maria, and she was 32 years old. She had 4 children, and she'd moved over to the US from El Salvador. She'd recently split from her husband, and she was just in a new chapter of her life, living as a single woman in a new place for the first time. But just 10 days after moving in, on the 1st of December 2005, Maria's body was found lifeless inside her apartment. This part is a little bit graphic, so here is a bit of a warning. Her apartment was completely covered in blood. She'd had her throat slit and had been stabbed multiple times. Her breasts had also been mutilated. Some reports also say that they were mutilated to the point where her breast implants were actually removed. One of her nipples was cut off and placed over her mouth. The police determined that whoever had done this seemed to have gained access to the property through the kitchen window, and they also noticed that a blue surgical shoe cover was left at the scene of the crime. A neighbour also said that a few days before this had happened, he noticed a man wearing a hoodie and a cap was looking through the window at Maria's property. Frustratingly, the police went around every single apartment in the building trying to speak to everybody that lived there and just find out what people knew. But every single time they went to Michael's apartment, he was never there. So they posted those little cards through that were just like, "We need to speak to you, give us a call back when you can." Every single time they would post one of those, but they would just never get a call back from Michael, because obviously in his mind, why would he actively ring the police when he's done something? But it just seems a little bit like uninspired by the police, because is somebody really going to ring back if they've got something to hide? I don't know. I just feel like you need to keep going back to the same property until you physically find the person, because ultimately he never got interviewed. He just never made contact with the police. They never made contact with him. They never added up the fact that he could be involved. I don't even think his name was really mentioned during the whole case of Maria. So for a long time, her murder was unsolved. So a few years after this, we're now in 2008, and Michael has moved to Santa Monica, and he actually has a wife, and he is living with his new wife, his new life. He just doesn't have a care in the world. But then on the 28th of April that year, a woman named Michelle Murphy, who lived just across the alleyway from Michael and his new wife and her mother, she woke up in the middle of the night to a man in a cap and a hoodie on top of her, stabbing her. She literally woke up in the middle of being stabbed. I can't even comprehend what you would be thinking in that moment. That must be absolutely horrific. Despite the fact that Michelle was only 5'1", she was only a small woman, she managed to fight off her attacker. And not just fight him off and run away, she managed to actually make him bleed a little bit. The police luckily were able to take the samples of the little bit of blood that she'd managed to get out of her attacker, and when they tested it in the database, they found out that it was a match to none other than Michael Gargiulo. So now that they have Michael's DNA confirmed at the scene of the attack of Michelle and under the fingernails of Trisha, way back in 1993, he finally gets arrested on the 6th of June 2008. He's been held by the Santa Monica Police Department, and he has been charged with the attempted murder of Michelle Murphy. You know what the media's like? During his trial, they actually gave him the nickname of the Hollywood Ripper. While the trial was going on, Ashton Kutcher was actually there, and he gave evidence of everything that night involving him and Ashley and what had happened and what was supposed to have happened. And the prosecution also gave a lot of evidence based on the Trisha case because they wanted to establish the fact that he was now a serial killer. Michael Gargiulo was convicted of 2 counts of murder, 1 for Ashley Ellerin and 1 for Maria Bruno, and also 1 count of attempted murder for Michelle Murphy. On the 16th of July in 2021, he was actually sentenced to death. When he was sentenced to death, Judge Larry Fidler gave the statement that everywhere Michael Gargiulo went, death and destruction followed. Michael even had the nerve to say before he was sentenced to death that he was going to death row unlawfully and unjust, which I just can't believe he even had the nerve to say. So I'm sure you're all wondering what happened with Trisha. Her case was mentioned during the trial, so why was he not given a murder charge for her case? Well, he's actually been extradited back to Illinois, and he is facing trial there for the murder of Trisha Pacascio, and I really hope that for her family, they get the justice that they deserve. There is evidence linking him to that crime. There is no way he can get away with that. He is a serial killer. He has murdered 3 women and attempted to murder another woman, and that is just something that he will never be able to get away from. And luckily, he is on death row and will never ever see the light of day again. But that is the case of Michael Gargiulo, and I cannot believe that he got away with it for so long. It's absolutely insane. There were so many moments, I think, when he could have been stopped, and it's just one of those things where it just kind of keeps snowballing and snowballing, and it just doesn't make any sense to anybody. But please let me know what you think in the comments. I would love to know what your opinions are. And don't forget to subscribe as well while you're here, because I will be back for you next week. Bye.